For those of you, and I know there were a lot of you who had not seen this documentary before, how many of you appreciate it? Saying enjoy it might be a little strong. Wonderful. Well, we will definitely get that information back to Ava. And in the interest of time, we'll keep this short. I want to just pose a couple of questions and have our panelists introduce them to you through their responses. And then we'll open up for the floor to take some questions as well. Is that okay? Okay, wonderful. Well, the experiences that are represented by the gentlemen that are a part of our panel tonight are varied and very relevant to the conversation that's going on. I think the film itself did a wonderful job of painting the history of how we got here. So with your permission, I want to start with my question in the here and now, and allow our panelists to introduce themselves to you and respond to it. And I do this for a living. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Stephanie Renee, program director and host of The Mojo on 900 AM WURD. And we engage in these kinds of conversations about where we are as a people and what we can do about it every single day on the airwaves. And so, Elle, we'll begin with you. Right now, politically, both here locally in Philadelphia and on a national level, there is a lot of conversation about opioid addiction. And what we are seeing from our elected officials is a conversation about treatment. Given all that history that we saw in the film and your personal history, we've been talking about the system evolving, right? There's a next iteration of how we deal with these things. When you see the debate that's going on now about how we as a nation are approaching opioid addiction in our communities, what does that conjure up in you?
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you got to talk directly in it, I've been told.
Hello? All right, that's better. I'll do both. Hello, everybody, and thank you so much. And first, thank you, Michael and Real Black, and he mentioned Scribe earlier, and all the people that done amazing work over the years. Before it was cool to support black media, they've been doing it, so thank you for that.
Yeah, let people know who you are when you answer questions,
that's
please.
right. So my name is Elle Sawyer. I'm a filmmaker. I'm the co-founder and co-founder and CEO of a film company, media company called Media Neighborhoods Group. It's Ming, and we make basically primarily socially conscious films. Our last film was a film called Pull of Gravity. If anybody has seen it or not, you need to. And Pull of Gravity followed 3 men over the course of a year. All 3 were in different stages of reentry from prison home, and I was one of them. I was fortunate to learn film in prison, or be introduced to film in prison, and I kind of parlayed that into a career. And I've been completed my 20-year sentence last November. I got off parole, and so that's kind of a story up to that point.
Yes.
So thank you about this question about opioid addiction. In doing film, we shoot films all over the country and internationally now, with a lot of work in Holland and other countries. We was in West Virginia specifically recently, Wheeling, West Virginia. And the way that people look at opioid addiction or substance abuse now, as it relates to mainly white communities across the country, as a huge epidemic, but it has never been an epidemic, obviously, in inner cities and with black and brown people, and that's a consistent thing. I mean, we're seeing it in the film, how it's never an issue until it affects a certain population of people. But so I'm not that smart, so I didn't catch the whole question, but and then you had a long question, but that's kind of my spill. Do you want to pass it on to someone else?
Well, and it can take on different shades of meaning. The real question is, we saw from the 70s the conversation around heroin then, crack and powder cocaine, and how it's evolved. And so here we are now back around the heroin again. But the conversation and the approach politically seems to be vastly different. And so because all of you have had interactions with the incarceration system, I'm just curious to see the lens through which you see this conversation evolving in our society now.
Let me kind of try to wrap it up to what I can speak on and feel okay about speaking on because of my experience. I didn't mention that, my film Pull of Gravity and other works that I've done has been funded by the Department of Justice. I have a very unusual relationship, have had an unusual relationship that way with the Department of Justice and being funded by them. And it's been, in my eyes, an amazing kind of weird dynamic. So with that said, is that when you see or when we show Pull of Gravity or other works that we have that we show it to from anywhere from at the time Eric Holder or Miss Loretta Lynch or any politician, judge or whatever. Mm-hmm. They literally look at it as like is newly found information, right? And what we do, the difference between what we do and what this film is, this is an amazing piece, is that this is a macro and what we do is super micro. We do very first person, very you get to touch, feel, smell the individual, their life and experience. Mm-hmm. And with that said is that when a lot of politicians speak about it, make laws about it, but when they actually get a chance to see it, it's like newly found information. And that really baffled me and it really disturbed me. A lot of political aspects of, even in this film, kind of ring true for even my work, because especially around just like even with voting or the politics and things, there's so much baked into that. Like how many people in here felt dumb after you watched this film as it relates to just specifically the Alex situation? I mean, I'm going to speak for myself. I did, right? But there's so many things that I've even come in contact with that I can kind of blurt out that a lot of y'all don't even know or understand, but yet we're voting for people that support that thing.
Right.
In the federal system, there's a thing called a 5K program. The 5K program is dealing with this thing around snitching, but we don't know how that leverages minimum mandatory sentences. Right? There's a Hobbs Act law, like a lot of people don't know, is how to basically lock up what would be, African Americans for supposedly hate crimes against Asian store owners. I mean, but it's so many people and there's these crazy minimum mandatories connected to it. So I say that all that just to say is that when you see films like this, it almost just reaffirms my own, and I have to admit, like, my own personal kind of not just uncomfortability, but just like not feeling welcome. Even after I'm not on parole, I still feel like I'm an alien in the U.S. Mm-hmm. in so many ways, because the laws that support this place and the laws that govern this place is not of me. It's not of my people, and it's not for me or my people, right? And I don't know if it will ever be. So, and I hate to sound weird, and that sounds weird coming from somebody supported by the Department of Justice, but I don't care, and I spoke that to President Barack Obama, right? I met with him and consulted with him on Justice Reform Act, and I told him that exact same thing, and he understood, and that he told me, and I'm pro kind of, Barack Obama, love that dude, right? But still feel super weird, right? Super support for him, but still feel super weird and contrasted because ultimately he, bombed 10 times as many drone strike bombs in the Middle East than Bush did, for Christ's sake. So I mean, we're so conflicted, and I feel like being in media. I'm sorry to keep talking, but you started something.
I see.
Being in media, I know what kind of power that film and media have. When I was out back and I was parked, and normally, just our film Pull of Gravity, we've screened it over 400 times in the country, all over this country, and in other countries as well. And I'm sitting outside in the car, and I'm seeing all y'all pull up in the car, and I'm just sitting there, because usually I'm the one y'all, coming to see the film, so I don't get a chance to actually see people coming. And I'm like, wow, somebody who's not here made a film, and y'all are coming to hear her perspective and voice on the thing. That's a powerful medium. And what we know about almost everything in our life is what has been told to us, either appropriately or not appropriately. Something that that spoke to our listening. Right? So it's like, wow, that makes you think, almost twice about like, wow, around politics, is it because they spoke appropriate, delivered that appropriate, packaged it to touch my ears, but still had a lot of nonsense in it? I don't know, but I'm sorry, you started it.
Yeah, no, but that, I mean, I think it is complex. I think a lot of us are struggling with how we interact with this system on a daily basis and still have the drive to change it. Right? Many of us related to some of the stories that we heard in this film and understand that it affects either our families or our communities almost directly. When we're talking about a statistic like 1 in 3 Black men are expected to be incarcerated over the course of their lifetime, that means that many of us in this room would either be a part of that system, be in relationships with people that are part of that system. It touches us in very, very tangible ways. So Mitchell, I come to you. And just in the interaction with, you can hold it, in the interaction with the notion of your familiarity with, interaction with this system of incarceration and what the next wave might be coming through our U.S. government.
Well, can I first deal with that opioid question?
Yes.
Now, when I think about that question, it really shows me how much we need to stick with our own people. I don't believe our problem is so much always the system, but us buying into what the system sells us. So now when it was us that was on the heroin or us that was on the crack and the war on drugs, and they dehumanized us, and we continually dehumanized each other. We continually looked at people and called them crackheads or dope fiends, and we continually labeled people by what their disease was, and we allowed the dehumanization of our own people. But then when it turned around, we will never see them dehumanize themselves. We will never see them dehumanize their people. So now it's a sickness. Now we're going to pass laws to give you a drug to put in your leg to bring you back from the OD. If they go in a church and kill 9 people, they are loners, and so they never criminalize their own people. But yet we are quick. If a black person is accused of something, we are quick to jump down their throats. We are quick to talk about them negatively. We are quick to not support them. As soon as Nate Parker started putting out the movie Birth of a Nation and they threw out an 18-year-old rape allegation, we were quick to jump down his throat and start saying, don't support what he's doing because he's a rapist. And so what it really shows me is they stick together and we don't. No matter what their people do. They know Christopher Columbus didn't really discover America and all the things that he did, but they won't take his date off the calendar, no matter how egregious he is. And when the natives say, you know what he did, take the date off the calendar, they say, no, we stick with our people. I don't care what he did. The founding fathers, I don't care what they did. I don't care how many slaves they did. I don't care how many people they killed. We are going to celebrate them. But then we, if as soon as our people are accused of anything, we automatically turn our backs on our own people. So when I think about that opioid thing, that's what I think to us. We need to learn how to stick with our people, even if they may do something wrong. But stick with your people. Don't allow somebody else to get you to turn against your own people.
And in this moment, especially as you're sharing your perspective, also please share some of your background with our audience.
Well, Well, my name is Mitchell Chance. I am a speaker and an author. My life is dedicated to the mental, emotional, spiritual, and financial repair of Africans in America because of the traumas that we dealt with. And I actually talked about that in my latest book, The Great Hijack, The Stealing of the Black Talented, 10th through a System of Self-Hate. So in that, I'm dealing with how they got us to buy into these things, the different psychological ways they use to get us to see things the way they want us to see it, that we won't be able to, or that we will, or that we don't work within our own best self-interest.
Indeed. Thank you for that. Brother Kevin,
Good
this
evening.
is something, you and I got a chance to chat a little bit as as the film was coming on. And so I know that both from the perspective of being in the inside and being out feeling caught up in a system, that's something that you experience very personally. So if you could add your perspective as well.
Good evening. How you guys doing? My name's Kevin Shird. I'm a writer, author, public speaker, and I also spent almost 12 years in prison for drug trafficking, right? And in my first book, Lessons of Redemption, I talk about that extensively. But I also talk about this issue of heroin in America, right? And then my second book, Uprising in the City, and that was actually about the uprising in Baltimore in 2015 and the history of that. Because a lot of people thought that at that moment, Baltimore was suddenly this incredible thing evolved, and no, we've been living that for 30 years. The rest of the world just got a chance to see it, right? After the CVS burned and some other things happened, right? Mm-hmm. So we've been living that for decades. But regarding this heroin situation and this opiate, so we got to be careful. We have to be real careful because this is business as usual, right? And we talked, prior to the film, but just watching this film. So I was actually in federal prison in the middle 90s and early 90s and through that whole thing with this mass incarceration, this Bill Clinton tough on crime and all these buzzwords, right? And that's what we got to be careful of. We got to be careful of these buzzwords because I was in prison at that time, right? And we lived that. So I lived partially of what this documentary is about. I lived it, right? I sat next to guys that had crack cocaine cases, were in federal prison, serving 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, 60 years, 70 years for non-violent drug offenses. I'm not talking about murder, I'm not talking about rape, I'm not talking about kidnapping, I'm talking about non-violent drug offenses. And I sat next to guys, right, when we turned on CNN, right, to see what the Democratic president, Bill Clinton, was gonna do for the black people, right? We turned on CNN to see if he was gonna change these laws, right? Or he was gonna try to make sense of all this. Because us in federal prison knew that this didn't make sense. Us in federal prison knew that crack cocaine wasn't a super drug. It was just baking soda, right? Us in federal prison knew that black people were being eaten alive, right? Hispanics and blacks. We were being eaten alive with these mandatory minimum sentences. And I remember being 20, 22 years old, 21 years old, and I remember looking around the federal prison, right? And yeah, we were in the streets doing a lot of things that we probably shouldn't have been doing, right? But one thing I realized sitting in a federal prison, right, with another 300 guys, is that something wasn't right about this picture. Because as you looked across the penitentiary, right, you saw black folks, right? And you knew that we only made up 13% of this country. But we made up about 80% of that tier in the mountains of Pennsylvania in a federal prison. So we knew something wasn't right about this picture. And that's what I mean. We got to be real careful, right, when they start putting these buzzwords about heroin epidemic. Well, it's been a heroin epidemic in the black community for 40 years, since this stuff started coming back from Vietnam. A long time. So there's nothing new, but we have to be really, really careful about this because we tough on crime literally ate us alive in this country. It ate us alive. It allowed these politicians to get reelected over and over. We sent more white politicians' kids to colleges, and we created more generational wealth, right, for white legislators and white politicians across this country than in the history of America on this tough on crime. Because Alex, this didn't just start. This thing been around for a long time. Private prisons is not new. Like we could put our money together in this room, right, and run up to Wall Street and put some money down on the correctional CCA, right, and start making some money off of black bodies that's incarcerated in prison. So we got to be real careful when these things start popping up. We got to have our eyes open. And real quick, I just got to say, there's a couple black politicians that need to pay, like Charlie Ringo and Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson. Those guys was around during that time, right? They were behind Clinton on his tough on crime. Let's pass some more tough laws. It's a price they need to pay because they were behind that whole situation. And now just to say I'm sorry, I made a mistake. Well, you got thousands of black people dead. Right, so yeah, of course you're sorry. So I hope I didn't go too far with that, but it's just a situation that I really gotta.
This is not censorship. This is sharing, and we got to be in a spirit to receive the real feelings that our panelists have. That's why you've been asked to be here today. So thank you, Brother William. Yes, you provide some generational perspective in this particular situation. The other brothers that sit on stage with you come from the same general demographic. You bring a little bit more elder wisdom into this situation. You have lived through the waves of what has been described in this film. Please share with our audience some of your personal background and some of your thoughts about this conversation we're having about this new war on drugs that we're dealing with in the United States.
Well, is it on? Can you hear me? I'm all right now?
Yeah, I was going to say.
I'm going to attempt to be transparent here. I do not like being on the stage. I like being in my living room, in my recliner, and having one-on-one conversations, some good coffee. I said yes only because Louis Messiah asked Michael to call me. And as soon as Michael said, Louis Messiah asked you to serve on this, I said yes. But you know, when you agree to do something like this, at least when I agree to do something like this, I'd be thinking in my head, what am I going to say all this, up until this point? And then we get here, I don't know what I'm going to say. I'm from Selma, Alabama. Born during the Jim Crow era, April 30th, 1949. Did incarcerated twice for two violent offenses. Let's see. I want to say something about the film, but I want to frame it in something Dr. John Henry Clark. Anyone heard of him?
Yes, sir.
All right. He's the one that coined the phrase, history is a current event. Do people understand what that means? History is a current event. And so, first of all, the sister did an explicit job, an excellent job. But she started off with convict leasing, slavery, convict leasing, Jim Crow, and the prison industry complex, mass incarceration. But I think we need to really look at the narrative and how we all been colonized in our mind. Africa was colonized twice by the Europeans. And then, before then, you had Constantine, who decided to organize the Christians. And then you had the Catholics, who terrorized the world for 500 years. Terrorized the world for 500 years. This is why they're so powerful now. Then you had the Middle Atlantic slave trade. Then you had the slavery here in this country. And you had convict leasing. Then you had Jim Crow. And we today have inherited that trauma. There's not an individual in this room that has not inherited that trauma. We all screwed up on some level. We alienate ourselves from our source through smoking, through drinking, through sex. We alienate ourselves from our ancestors, from what we feel. So alienation is a real serious thing. We get our bling and we want to leave the ghetto. We get a little something and we want to indict those people who doing it differently than we do. We also arrested in our development on so many different levels. We enable each other in so many different levels. And when I say enable, it's not just like somebody coming in to get $1, $5, or $25 for some heroin or some crack. We create codependent relationship and then we backbite. We make ourselves feel good by saying they are doing something stupid, and yet we give it to them. So we each have inherited some trauma from the stuff that Emmett Till. It was hard for me to listen. I don't see it, but this is hard for me to listen. So I'm working in the trenches with brothers and sisters who are coming out of jail, and we are really decolonizing our way of thinking. We are decolonizing our way of thinking. Our philosophy is changing ourselves to change the world by uniting the many to defeat the few. And it's very, very important that we recognize how we've been conditioned to indict each other. We have been conditioned to indict each other. I don't know if people understand what that means. Mm-hmm. So we perpetuating the pain that we see in there every day by creating distraction and disconnect amongst ourselves. Do I need to say anything else?
I think that's great for now. Okay. If you're good, we're good.
I'm good.
I'm going to ask one more question, and then we'll open it up for your thoughts and comments, audience, and that's about economics. For all of you gentlemen who have at some point interacted with this system, you all are now having books, having films, having a different kind of interaction with the public, the way you earn your living and the way that you're you might hesitate for me saying ministering, but in a way, you're counseling, you're ministering to other people who have been through a similar situation right. through the work that you're doing now. How are we misframing, maybe, the economics of the system of incarceration in our nation so that we're not preventing more of our young people from getting caught up in this system and continuing to populate these prisons in the rate that we are doing now? There's clearly something that we're missing, either the way that we are choosing in masses to engage still in quote unquote criminal activity, right, in order to try and get to something, or not understanding how money is being made off of our lives once they are caught up in this system, and having a different kind of judgment call about what that means in people's everyday walk. So no particular order, but what don't we understand about the economics of the situation that we need to better communicate right. to our young people?
So I always try to stress to people two things. So this private prison thing, like, the public needs to know this and understand it. And this is my second time watching this film, and there are so many people that didn't even know that private prisons was possible, right? It's just another form of slavery in my mind. And I remember sitting in federal prison and watching what they call Unicor, right? So Unicor would employ prisoners. I mean, you're talking about these guys would get paid literally $2 a day, like crazy numbers, to package things for these corporations, to manufacture things for these corporations at these nothing but slave labor. That's all. It's no other word for that. If you're paying a human being $2 a day to do anything, that's slave labor, right? So what I try to stress to young people is that even when we're in the streets and we're in the game and we think we're the hottest thing since whatever, and we're making money and whatever, you got to understand, once you get caught up, that's going to get flipped. And somebody's going to be making a bunch of money off of you. And again, I can't stress this enough. Stockholders and investors in these companies like CCA, these private prisons, because they have stockholders. And you can go online and look up all this stuff, right? They actually trade a stock on Wall Street, right? So when you commit a crime and you get caught up, or you get arrested, or you end up going to prison, and you end up in one of these private prisons across the country, across the United States, you end up in one of these prisons, these people are making money off of you. So now you're sending somebody else's kid to college. You're building generational wealth for somebody else's family and for somebody else's spouse, right? They're buying cars and going on vacation off of your back. And that's one of the most humiliating things that you can live through. And I remember this is all my memories coming back with federal prison. Because I remember sitting there watching CNN and watching a judge that had just been indicted in Ohio, right, for sending, he actually owned stock in a prison, private prison, and he was sending juveniles, he was filling up the juvenile prison, right? And a reporter got wind of this and said, wait a minute, you're like the only judge in this county that sends 90% of the kids that come in front of you in court off the prison. It could be jaywalking. They're going to prison, right? It don't matter. And the reporter got wind of this and started doing an investigation and found out that this guy actually owns stock. And again, he got indicted, and right, and it ended up on CNN, and the world saw that. But how many of these guys are there around the country? How many of these judges are there around the country that are in somebody's pocket, and we're paying a price, right? So those are things you gotta understand when you're talking about mass incarceration, and even the young people that feel like, okay, the game is the only way. And I'm like, okay, well, you might feel that way, but don't let that flip on you, right? And you end up sending somebody else, building up somebody else's pocket, and now your family is out here struggling because you're away in prison. The only man in the household is away to prison. It's something you really gotta think about.
I want to just jump in here very quickly, just in case you're still in the room. There is a Volvo SUV in the parking lot just next door, a dark color. We don't have an exact color. Pennsylvania plates 51733. Your alarm is going off and it's draining your battery. So if you are still in the room, you might want to go just click it off so that you'll still have some power to drive home. Okay.
We're going to share.
Okay.
We share.
I'm going to use this for Q&A, so
There you go.
I'll use yours.
I wanted to say is one thing that I know, not only from personal experience, when I went to juvenile facility when I was 15 and did 2 years, and by the time I was 17, I was re-incarcerated for 8 years, and I came home when I was 23, right? I know from personal experience from then and from personal experience now, being privy to stories and lives and documenting families and things, that it hurts me, that when I'm places, out in the world or on TV or whoever, you'll see people talk about people that are either, going to prison or whatever as a conscious act. Like they had a huge choice in the matter. Again, I always look at it as like interrogation, right? Or forget that, like torture, right? If somebody's tortured and they end up breaking, and you know they're gonna break. I mean, they're only human. I look at poverty. Poverty is almost like radiation, right? The only thing to keep you from being affected by that radiation, there has to be something in between, right? There has to be a block in between. So what we're seeing is a result of, it's not, and for all due respect to anybody with it, it's not just decarcerating. It's not just sending people home. The question of everything we do is geared toward where is people coming home to? Because it's not, and all due respect again, it is not. We look at recidivism, and we look at people going to prison and all these things because of personal experience and everything. But that's a throw line for us. It is a throw line to kind of eventually, it's like follow the bouncing ball, to get people to look at communities. Nobody speaks about grandma that's dying 30 years or junior, 30 years. Just because of a mile away difference. How many funerals I go to, somebody's 57, 60 years old, and they speak about them like they had a long life. And not even talk about dying early enough, but they lived a rough life in the process, right? So we're talking about poverty. We're talking about people that think that we're making a conscious decision to do this and do that, but we're under duress. We're under pressure. These people, when you see this recidivism rate, again, use examples. Minnesota, we're talking about in Minnesota. They say, oh, we're going to decarcerate. We have the lowest prison population in the country. Okay, but they got people on parole for 30 years. So yeah, you get the lowest prison population, but you got people under the risk of going back to jail, average person going to jail 10 times. California, Proposition 57, right? With the juveniles lifers laws, where you have people just being sent home after, X amount of years and with no preparation, nothing. So obviously we don't want people in prison. Obviously we want people to come home appropriately and want them to come home to appropriate environments. Again, we're only human, and when you see people going to prison, it's not a conscious act, and that will be the same for any race of people that's under the same duress. I don't want to go into the whole situation, but yeah, just trust and believe that's the case.
I think go ahead. You got it.
The question was around economics, right?
Yes. And what are we missing?
Yeah, I think we've been miseducated about what capital is, and we tend to see capital as the dollars, the economic, the bank, finances. Capital is people, is resources, and what we do is direct the individual, especially young people, to embrace their brilliance and stop the nonsense of what they had been doing. Mm-hmm. And so when we talk about capital, when we talk about building relationship, then we find ourselves being a lot more prosper in terms of where we go in life. And it's important for the young people within our network to create an environment where they're going to create a new justice paradigm, whether it's around capital, whether it's around relationship. We have a young brother here in the audience that is the chair of our youth work, and our paradigm shifter are children who are infant to 13. And so we cannot afford to allow those people to come in, or that generation to come in and be conditioned by what we all are talking about now. We need to create a generation of people that's going to understand that they are their own capital, that they can create their own environment, that they can create their own security, they can create their own jobs. So we have to create a safe space for young people, new generations, to come in and create their own paradigm. We don't have any idea what they might need or what they might want, but we do know now they need to be in a safe space by which they can think, they can begin to do their own mindfulness, they can understand what business is like. So we teach and show people that time management and understanding your own value at this junction is the way to become economically successful. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, Clinton and Trump are the same people. And there's no way they're going to allow this caste system that Michelle Alexander talked about to change. So we're going to have to recognize that this is a casual state. In other words, we are all incarcerated. And we're going to have to figure out a way through our youth to change the way they think about dollars, cents, and their own value.
Yeah, thank you.
Now, I think what we miss with everything is just education. Now, me, I'm a street preacher. I'm on the corners. I'm in the streets. I'm in the trenches. I'm around I want to call them the people that everybody else would consider the worst people. So I think when we deal with the economics period, but specifically with the prison system, I think it's a dual thing. We have to educate them on the economics that their behaviors are creating for other people, and also the economics that you are missing out on. So now when I'm out in the streets talking to these guys, and I'm breaking down how much money is allocated per student versus how much money is allocated per prisoner, it opens up everybody's mind. I don't care what they into, who they shot yesterday, when I begin to talk about that, because nobody wants to be taken advantage of. And when you begin to speak to them about how they're being manipulated and used and abused, it begins to open up their minds. But on the other hand, we also have to educate them on the economics that they are missing out on, because in our neighborhoods a lot of us can't see past our eyes vision, so we don't know what else is possible that we can be. And I always say you cannot be or attain that which you do not know exists. So we have to begin to expose them to different things. So I go to a lot of youth prisons and I talk to the youth a lot, and I wrote a book, The 4 Phases of Transformation, and the first phase was becoming aware that there's more. You got to become aware that there's more. So I was on my way driving to Vision Quest, and as I'm driving, the radio was on and the weather came on, and after the weather came on, they said their name, you're a local meteorologist. And as I was driving, I'm getting ready to talk to the kids about becoming aware that there's more. I said, I don't know a meteorologist. I don't know nobody that ever even wanted to be a meteorologist. What do it take to become a meteorologist? How much does a meteorologist make?
Right.
So I'm thinking all this because my mind was already in the mode of exposing these kids to more. So now I start Googling it. By the time I got there, I'm like, meteorologists making $180,000 a year. So now when I go into the jail, a lot of times the people that bring me in, like, can you tell them your story? I say, no, I never tell my story, because whenever I tell my story, that's what they want to glorify. But I can tell you where I'm going and where you can go. I can expose you to some different monies that can be made. I can talk to you about some people that you never heard of that are making billions of dollars a year. And whenever I do that, I get them to pull out the phone and look up somebody like Ray Diallo, who runs a hedge fund. Dude's making like $7 billion a year. As soon as they see that, they say, well, how do I run a hedge fund? Automatically open up their mind. So we have to educate them, one, on how they are being manipulated and used because of their behaviors, but also educate them on the economics that they are missing out on, because there's so much money out there to be made, and you don't have to break no laws. I was in the streets for years, but now I'm making money and I'm not worried about nothing. I get ebook sales and I'm just sitting here. It don't get no better than that, you know what I mean? And when I begin to talk to them about that, that begins to change their mindsets. One, understanding that they've been manipulated, and then two, understanding that there's so much more that they can and will be able to achieve if we just expose them to it.
Thank you for that. We open up the floor to you.
Okay,
You've seen the film, you've heard from our panelists. Now
okay,
your
so
questions.
got this gentleman. I'm going to work my way over. I'm not going to forget about you, but here, and then this lady.
And who's our timekeeper that's going to keep us honest?
I have about 3 or 4 questions. It's 9:30 right now.
Okay.
Kevin's got to be on a 10:30 train. All right.
Hey, my name is Walt. I'm not going to stand because I'm not really important. And you kind of started the question answering it, these 2 last responses that I was headed to. But I thought about Angela Davis in the film and how she was able to overcome her situation. And I look in the audience, and there are a lot of black women in the audience, so I want to kind of reframe my thought so that we're inclusive of that. Because we don't have any women on the stage, and we have a lot of women coming home from prison as well, who are mothers and grandmothers, and it's important that they're able to relate to the youth as well. I work with young black men ages 15 to 22, and one of the things we always struggle with, I have these kind of conversations, and we're usually preaching to the choir, preaching to the converted, people who are already doing the work or very interested in doing the work. What are some really simple, practical ways we can, I don't want to say the word convince or persuade, but it's the only thing I can think of right now, to get our young men to see and to help people who want to work with these young people, mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters? What are some really simple and practical ways we can help them see how to help these young people? Because we're fighting a couple of other influences, media and television and so on and so forth. And it makes it difficult, I know firsthand, to reach some of these young people. And Mitchell just mentioned a great response. But what are some more ways that we can really get them to see that there's more than some of the poor choices or decisions they might make out in the street?
All right, so that question, so were you asking how do we get the adults to see how they need to work with the youth? Or what, is that what the question was?
How can we get the adults in the community, right, who are not speakers, right, who are not, like, have these platforms that you have, what are some simple, practical ways we can help them, you can help them, help young people that they're responsible for and that they see it?
Okay, I got you. So now, personally, some years ago, I started a mentor program called I Am a Role Model. I ran it for a couple of years, straight out of my pocket. Became too much. I couldn't maintain it, and I had a really, really big problem. I couldn't get men to help me. So after I shut it down, I'm like, well, I can't find any men who want to do it or men who are qualified to actually do it. So I pulled back and said, you know what? I'm gonna start mentoring men. So I found 7 different guys that I knew, and I started meeting with them every Sunday night at my house. And I began to teach them. And we had principles, and our 6th principle was always be a mentor and role model to young men. So now through teaching these men and instilling this principle in them, now for over a year, I was teaching these guys, and now they're going back. So a lot of our adults might not be ready for it, but we have to take the time to pour into them. Those of us who have it, we got to take the time to pour into them, because they might have never been poured into their entire lives. So I see that now as I pour into the men, they begin to take what I teach them, and they're taking it home to their wives, and they're taking it home to their children, they're taking it home to their blocks. So I think that's what we have to do, have a little patience with them and pour into them as much as we can.
And then the other thing is just do it. Like, so there's 2 things. There's a platform and there's access, right? If they're on your block, if that's your neighbor, if you know his name, you got better access to him than me, right? And I just have this philosophy about young people. So you talking about 13, 14, 15 years, they are just open for information. They just want information. And that's why we gotta be careful as a community, because we gotta be careful what information they get. I learned how to cut dope at 16 years old, right? But guess what? If a black lawyer has stepped at me and grabbed me and said, look, kid, I'm going to teach you this thing. Or a black brother off of Wall Street would have grabbed me when I was 15 or 16 and said, look, I'm going to show you how to make some money. Right? But that didn't happen for me. What happened for me was the guys that were selling dope. They got to my ear. So it's access, but then it's also a platform. If this kid is on your block, you got him. Right? He wants something. He's looking for something. Right, and it just take a little bit of will and the courage, but you on the ground, and that's the best place to be.
That question to me sounds like we tend to look at young people in abstract, and in the sense that they are this phenomenon over there that needs some kind of correcting, and we are this over here that can do that correcting. And I say that because every child we see, or every young person we work with, is either in a family or with a group. And so my response to that question is, we have to create a model where the individual is already whole. And so within our organization, and we work with men and women coming home from prison, And we work with them on a spiritual level, their educational level, the decisions that they make or lack thereof, and then we deal with the family. We have subgroup to help them deal with that, and that indeed turns around to working with them and the children. A lot of time we found out that young people have a better understanding of what the sister said here than we do. They have a better understanding, so it sounds like we sort of see young people, because we ain't in that age bracket, we see them as separate from us. And my response to you would be, figure out a way to get into that family and begin to work with that family, because that child comes from a family, and even if it's not their biological family. So I think it's part of my French, or the way I'm phrasing it, if there are European Americans in here, but that's a very Eurocentric way of doing it, by separating the child from the family. One last comment. Hillary Clinton took that phrase, it takes a village to raise a child, and they didn't use the whole phrase. The whole phrase, it takes a village it takes a village to raise a child and to maintain a relationship. So no child is out there by themselves. So I think we need to struggle to build the family, the community, in order to bring that child into it.
Next question.
Hello. Hi, everyone. So I'm not black, obviously, but...
you sure?
So I grew up in Malaysia, and I am preconditioned, as I was a little kid, to be afraid of the African American community. And I see a lot of my friends, I work in a corporate environment, a lot of my corporate friends most of them are white, and they're afraid of the African American community as well. So, and I have to say, prior to me moving to Philly, I used to live in the burbs, and was in King of Prussia. Can't get any whiter than that. So I live in a bubble, and I used to have the same fear. My parents instilled it in me, and that problem is all exacerbated by the media. And this movie was perfect. It was an eye-opening experience for me to see exactly where the problem is. Now, my question is, before I get there, now I live in a very diverse neighborhood with a lot of African Americans, and I don't feel afraid anymore. As a matter of fact, just about 2 weeks ago, we have right outside of our house, we have a group of young men playing loud music, and my wife and I were trying to go to sleep, and I just went over there and said, hey, should I turning the radio down? And they were the nicest people ever. And it's like, sure, no problem. And 6 years ago, I wouldn't be that person because I would be afraid. So this problem has been exacerbated by the media again, that African Americans are always scary. Now, my question is, how do you, as a panelist, see how do we change this mentality? Because I can talk to my coworkers and say, I live in a very diverse neighborhood, and they are like the nicest people ever. Now, my question is, well, how can I change their mindset? Because they don't live in my neighborhood. They live in more affluent neighborhoods, right? So what can I do as a person to change of non-African American descent, to change that mentality? And I was hoping to get some clarity from the panel.
Can I ask you a question real quick?
Sure.
So what made you move to a neighborhood where there was more African Americans? You had this fear, but you did it anyway.
Right.
So what made you do that?
Sure. My wife. So
all right, well, you got to tell some of your white friends to get a wife.
Transforms.
That's how you fix it.
right. Exactly.
No, seriously. I mean, if you're willing to be open, it'll happen. See, you're dealing with a lot of really closed-minded people, right? But if you're willing, you'll learn, you'll change, you'll grow. And if you're not willing, it won't happen. And I don't. That's the best answer I can give.
Can I jump in?
You know?
So let me just say, you brought up this dynamic, this kind of about marketing and what you've been kind of receiving all your life. There's a thought kind of going on right now. It's called a model minority, right? You familiar with this phrase? Well, API, Asian Pacific Islanders, specifically Chinese though, but Asian Pacific Islanders are considered the model minority, right? And we're working on a project right now. It's about employment for people returning home from prison. And we went to the most disparate, economically not diverse section of the country, which is San Francisco and the Bay Area. As you're there, specifically in the Tenderloin section of the city, like you talk about, like you're scared in the African American neighborhood, like an African American for us, anyone would be scared in these communities. The idea is it's all about your perspective is your reality, right? So the idea is that the more me and my wife was getting on a plane, and every time we get on a plane, obviously looking like this these days, that's an issue. And we was going to Holland. And we were sitting, waiting to get on the plane, and this gentleman, he was like a military contractor, sat down with us or invited us to sit at his table, and was eating. And he said, we was talking about, that fact of being kind of timid about getting on a plane. And he says, he had this quote. He says, ignorance is allergic to exposure. Right, and that meant a lot to me, right? Whereas though, when we're working on this project now, like I said, in San Francisco, and this one gentleman, his name's Eddie Zhang, and if you ever get a chance to look up Eddie Zhang, I encourage everybody to look up Eddie Zhang, and he has a new documentary out called Breathing, and he's Chinese American who committed a crime at the age of 17 and went away for life, and was commuted, and is now home, and he's a city commissioner in San Francisco. So with that said, it's all about exposure. Again, coming from Philadelphia, when I went out there, literally the film almost leaned toward, it was about incarceration and returning home, and it almost leaned toward being about Asian Pacific Islanders, and just like how much that was blowing my mind because I wasn't exposed to that. Right, but they're second only to African Americans, and is for folks that are being incarcerated and killed in the Bay Area. And I just want to say, somebody gave a quote about African Americans being incarcerated in San Francisco. Just as a point, San Francisco has 5% African Americans. The population in San Francisco is 5% African Americans, and the prison population is 75% African Americans. 75%. So
I just wanted to also jump in. If you know people that are open to other media sources like this, where they can see the problem illustrated, Michael Moore's film Bowling for Columbine had some input from the creators of South Park, the cartoon, and in the middle of the film, they have a whole piece called The History of Fear in America, and talk about the way that it has been built up over the years to have this distrust that we have among ethnic groups because of the kind of policies of white supremacy in this country. So you might want to just, as a conversation piece, look at it and see if that might also help stir the conversation.
I would suggest that you examine yourself. For the person who has that fear or has that inhibition about any other race, I think that person or that group should examine themselves. For some people who want to get closer to another group, and let me use you have some liberal Europeans who wants to do work on behalf of African Americans who have an uncle that got this Confederate flag on his or her chest, and that liberal won't go and deal with that uncle, but will come into our neighborhood calling themselves activists. So I think for people who have that fear or have that inhibition, I think it's important to really examine where that came from.
All right. So last question over here. Mitchell, your mic's not on.
Yeah, I don't think it's on.
Oh, okay. That's strange. Is there another mic by the floor?
Yeah, I just said push the conversation. Become an advocate and push the conversation as much as you can. That's it. That's all I had to say.
Yeah, we're recording this. Good to have it. All right, the last question here. I know everybody's it's been a long night.
So Stephanie, Renee, I just wanted to make a comment on your opiate issue because I work for an outpatient and I have some diverse responsibilities. I work for a black-owned outpatient, which is the first black-owned outpatient in Pennsylvania.
Wow.
So the opiate problem, based on me attending different meetings, and the latest one I met with the state drug and alcohol person in charge of drug and alcohol in Pennsylvania. So it was driven in Philadelphia, I can say very clearly, by the pill and pharmaceutical industry. So when you talk about the opiate industry, and a lot of folks have this notion of heroin, and so we have to really understand that in our community, especially a lot of our young people, the opiates that they're doing, their choice of opiate is Percocet and syrup. That's being left out of the conversation, okay, in the rooms. They go straight to heroin because it doesn't deal with the problem in our community. So what happens is there are people like me, and I'm not the only one. We have to be, and if you're out there and you're a part of this, be spooks who sat by the door. And when we are part of that process, we have to make sure that we're there and we're actually telling them. So for example, I walked the state drug and alcohol person through that. I actually stopped him when he tried to go the route of the heroin. I said, wait, no. You see my little sisters that have these backpacks on and they're catching a bus and they seemingly are wandering around and they're homeless? The impact of what they're doing is because their choice of opiate. And my little brothers who are doing these things that the news articulate that are crazy or whatever, their choice may be the pill and the syrup. So I just want everybody to walk away from here, if you live in a community, or if you're an advocate in the community, or if you're a person in the community and you're around these young people, it's not the powder thing. If you have children, young people, it's not the powder thing. It eventually gets to the powder thing because it's driven there because the price of the powder is cheaper at some point. It's a huge, huge problem that's being left out of the conversation when we talk about opiate. And then finally, on the business side, there are providers that are at the table, and you need to understand that their main interest is grant money to keep their organizations going, and they have no idea of the impact that this thing is doing to people that live in communities and look like me and you. So thank you for that.
Absolutely, thank you. And as we conclude tonight, thank you for those of you who have stuck around till the end. One of the things that is a recurring theme from all of our panelists, I think, is owning definitions and being able to make sure that we are conversing with one another so we know we're speaking the same language, that we're speaking about the same subject. So along with all the statistics that you got from the film, let us also make sure that we are clearly communicating to one another about what we see as the problems and how we can work together to resolve them. Thank you so much for your time.